The Battle of Spion Kop took place in January 1900 during the Anglo-Boer War in South Africa. In a calamitous, bordering upon farcical set of events, the British managed to seize the steep-sided hill of Spion Kop from under the noses of the Boers, only to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. This bloody battle saw 335 Boers killed or wounded and nearly 1,500 British casualties. It was a battle that brought three incredible political leaders to within a few miles of each other. Botha, the first Prime Minister of South Africa, British wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Mahatma Gandhi. It was also a battle that had a link to Jack the Ripper and to one of the most famous football stands in the world, the Kop at Liverpool F.C.'s ground, Anfield. The Boer War in South Africa between 1899 and 1902 pitted the forces of the two Afrikaner or Boer republics of Transvaal and the Orange Free State against the British Empire. Now, I've covered the reasons behind the war and a summary of the overall conflict in a previous video, a link to which is appearing about now. The war began in October 1899 and had started badly for the British. In my last Boer War video, I shared the Battle of Colenso. It was the third defeat of that the British Army suffered in a week at the hands of the Boers, a 5-day period that the British press dubbed Black Week. Colenso was a major setback for the British commander, General Redvers Buller, as he pushed to relieve the besieged garrison at Ladysmith. By mid-January 1900, the situation hadn't really changed. Ladysmith was still under siege, but General Buller had formulated a new plan. He would outflank the Boer defences by crossing the Tugela River upstream from Colenso, about 27 kilometres southwest of Ladysmith. As at Colenso, General Buller chose to use a two-pronged attack, crossing at two different points on the Tugela River. To the right, General Littleton would cross at Podgeta's Drift with the 4th Brigade, consisting of the Rifle Brigade, the Durham Light Infantry, the King's Royal Rifles and the Scottish Rifles. But first, General Warren would cross 5 miles upstream at the furthest extremity of the Boer defences, on the Tabanyama Ridge, also called the Rangeworthy Hills. So whilst the two-pronged attack was similar to Colenso, the distances were far, far greater, and in an age where there were no telephones or even telegraphs, control of the battle would be reliant on heliographs, signal lamps and old-fashioned runners. This would be a challenge for any general brought up on the closely controlled colonial battles of the previous half-century. It would prove even more challenging if your generals weren't fast and decisive. Enter General Sir Charles Warren. Sir Charles Warren was 60 years old and had been commissioned in the Royal Engineers back in 1857. A solid military career had resulted in his most famous appointment as Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police in London during the 1880s. He was Commissioner during the Jack the Ripper murders in Whitechapel, and the barrage of criticism that he endured for failing to catch the murderer led to his resignation. Now, back in the army, Buller put him in command of the 5th Division, consisting of 10,600 infantry, 2,200 mounted troops and 36 guns. Seeing as the Boers were defending the entire Tugela sector with 15,000 men, and only of whom about 600 were actually stationed on the Tabanyama Ridge above the drift, where Warren would cross, this was a perfect opportunity for an aggressive general to strike out and make the Boers fall back before being encircled. On the 17th, Warren began to cross the river. The process took him 2 whole days. And then for the next 4 days, rather than advancing, he sent Buller requests for more artillery, whilst in the meantime shelling the Boer positions with the 36 guns that he did have. This very visible and painfully slow build-up gave the Boers ample time to reinforce their positions. By the time Buller personally rode over to Warren on the 23rd of January, 4,000 Boers under General Botha were now entrenched on the heights above the river. Buller told Warren to attack the ridge. By now, of course, the Tabanyama Ridge would be a tougher nut to crack, so Warren decided on a counter-intuitive strike. He would seize the sheer-sided hill that commanded the range, Spion Kop. Spion Kop, translated meaning spy or lookout hill, rises to an impressive 1,500 feet. It was from here that the Boer voortrekkers, fleeing British rule nearly half a century beforehand, looked down on what is now KwaZulu-Natal, like the ancient Israelites looking down on the Promised Land, hence its name. Apart from the sheer sides, which make Spion Kop hard to ascend, Warren's plan had some merits, because due to those steep sides, The Boers had left it virtually defenceless, save for a picket of German volunteers on the summit. If Warren could seize the Kop, he could mount his guns on the summit and would clear the Boers from the ridges overlooking the Tugela, opening the way up for the relief of Ladysmith. And despite the eventual debacle, it actually came closer to success than many people remember. On the very evening after Buller had visited him, Warren assembled his strike force, the 11th Brigade, under Major General Woodgate. The 11th Brigade consisted of regiments chiefly recruited from the northwest of England: the 2nd Battalion King's Royal Lancashire Regiment, based out of Lancaster, the 2nd Lancashire Fusiliers, many of whose members came from the Salford, Manchester, Bury region of the county, the 1st Battalion of the York and Lancashire Regiment, and the South Lancashire Regiment. This last regiment were based at the Peninsula Barracks in Warrington, and many of their numbers hailed from both Warrington and nearby St Helens in Lancashire. The brigade also consisted of the 19th, 20th and 28th batteries of the Royal Field Artillery. They were to be led uphill by 200 members of Thornycroft's Mounted Infantry. Before the outbreak of the war, Lieutenant Colonel Alex Thornycroft had been sent by the War Office in London to South Africa to recruit local white settlers to fight for the British cause. The 20-stone, red-faced Thornycroft had recruited members of both the settler community and the Uitlander refugees from the Transvaal and had formed them into this mounted infantry unit. They moved forward as quietly as possible at 9 p.m. Sometime between 2 and 3 a.m. near the summit, they were challenged in German by a sentry from the Boer picket. Shots rang out from the Boer pickets, and then with a cry of "Majuba!" Thornycroft led a bayonet charge to the summit. The tiny Boer picket fled, leaving some of their boots behind. Within an hour, Major Massey from the Royal Engineers was mapping out a trench, and his sappers, armed with 20 spades and picks, started scraping a defensive work in the rough, stony ground. Woodgate's Lancastrians stumbled onto the summit and grabbed some rest, while those sappers were digging away. Down below Spion Kop, 37-year-old General Louis Botha was awoken by the fleeing Boer pickets, who told him that the Kop was in British hands. Botha was theoretically in joint command of the Boer force here with General Schalkberger. 10 years older than Botha, Schalkberger was more of a politician than a real fighter. Indeed, he was to go on to become the acting president of Transvaal when President Kruger fled into exile. So, whilst in joint command, there was no doubt who was the fighting man, and all eyes looked to Botha, who had two choices really: fall back towards Ladysmith or climb the steep sides and retake Spion Kop. He chose the second option. Botha was optimistic. Despite the British being in possession of the summit, his position wasn't entirely hopeless. Two knolls or hills on the Kop plateau were currently vacant. Conical Hill, about 800 yards to the north of where the British were, and Allow Knoll, about 400 yards to the east. And whilst both of these were about 100 feet lower than the summit of Spion Kop themselves, they were in good positions to act as launch pads for an assault on the British positions. Such an assault would also be supported by long-range Boer rifle fire from Twin Peaks and Green Hill. And furthermore, Botha could also order his own artillery to fire on the summit of the Kop, which would be at their mercy until the British hauled their own guns up there. Botha rode to his commandos and passionately pleaded with them to assault and retake Spion Kop. Hendrik Prinsloo, another young Boer commando who shared Botha's aggressive style of warfare, agreed to lead the Carolina Commando up the steep slopes. As they slowly started to climb, they were joined by the men of the Pretoria Commando. Meanwhile, up on the summit, the early morning sun burnt through the mist, and the British now realised their trenches, such as they were in the wrong position. Due to a combination of inaccurate maps along with the pitch black of the African night and the swirling mist, Major Massey and his limited team of sappers had dug a 300-yard curved trench in the wrong place. Instead of being on the crest of the summit overlooking Botha and Schalkberger's camps far below, they were actually 200 yards further back midway across the summit. And the British now found themselves hemmed into an area about an acre in size, about a rugby pitch in size. Realising their mistake, Massey ordered his men forward to dig a new position, but at that very moment, Men from the Carolina and Pretoria commandos seized Aloe Knoll just 400 yards away. Accurate Boer fire ripped into the engineers, killing most of them, including Major Massey. With Spion Kop now bathed in sunlight, the Boer guns just 2 miles away opened fire. At 8:30, General Woodgate was on his way to the edge of the Kop to assess the Boers ascending the steep sides towards him, when he was hit above the right eye by a shell fragment, falling mortally wounded. Everywhere on the summit, the British troops were seeking cover from both the Boer shelling and from the growing rifle fire from both Aloe Knoll and now Conical Hill as well. Colonel Blomfield, the commanding officer of the Lancashire Fusiliers, was also cut down. The commanding officer of the Royal Lancasters, Colonel Crofton, seemed to take a very low profile in the fight and was left to Thornycroft of the Mounted Infantry to not only rally his own men, but the British regular troops as well. Thornycroft led a charge of 40 men of mixed Mounted Infantry and Lancashire Fusiliers to try and dislodge the Boers. Rushing forward, the 20-stone giant tripped and he fell flat on his face, just as the Boer bullets whizzed over his head. Around him, his assault party lay dead and injured. 3 more charges by the Royal Lancs ended in disaster too. It was now 9:50 in the morning, and already the men on Spion Kop were starting to suffer from thirst and the sun, as well as enemy activity. 3 miles away, Warren received an alarming note from Colonel Crofton of the Royal Lancs. Reinforce at once, or all is lost. With a speed not normally associated with Warren, he ordered General Coke up the hill with the Dorset and Middlesex regiments, along with the Imperial Light Infantry. Crucially, however, despite Botha pulling troops away from their positions, he didn't launch Hart's Irish Brigade against the now lightly defended Tabanyama Ridge. Instead, he sent a telegraph message to Littleton over to the east, asking for assistance and pointing out that whilst his side of the Kop was, in his words, clear, the side closest to Littleton was strongly held by the Boers, and if assistance wasn't given at once, all was lost. Not surprisingly, Littleton sprung into action, sending the 2nd Scottish Rifles to support the men on the summit, whilst launching the 1st Rifle Brigade up the sheer slopes towards the Twin Peaks. With the situation on the summit now starting to get desperate, no reinforcements, no guns, no food, no water, Warren sent a message to Thornycroft, placing him in charge. Around now, 1 p.m, some units of the Lancashire Fusiliers tried to surrender to the Boers. As those surrendering Lancastrians advanced warily towards the Boers with their hands up, the Boers, equally wary, broke cover to accept their surrender, when suddenly Thornycroft, leaning on a walking stick, marched in between them and told the Boers there would be no surrender. Confusion now reigned on the summit, and at that moment the Middlesex regiment arrived over the crest of the hill. The Boers grabbed about 170 of their prisoners and fled as the Middlesex regiment charged with fixed bayonets, past the wrongly positioned trenches, pushing the Boers all the way to the crest of the Kop. Sometimes life is about perspectives, and here's one of those moments. The British had hung on throughout the hot African day with no water, no food, no guns or even artillery support. They'd had enough. Thornycroft had had enough. He hadn't heard from his commanding officer, Warren, for hours. In fact, since the message appointing him to take command earlier that afternoon. The Boers had climbed the slopes of Spion Kop in the daylight. They too had fought with no water or food for a full day in the sun. And now they were just being charged by fresh troops with bayonets. They had received no significant reinforcements from their generals. They too had had enough, and as darkness fell, they slipped off the mountain. By the time Botha had arrived to assess the situation firsthand, the Boers had vacated Aloe Knoll and Conical Hill. Even worse news for the future South African Prime Minister was the news that the Rifles had incredibly scaled those sheer slopes and taken Twin Peaks. Looking around, he saw his army drifting away, including his fellow general, Schalk Burger, who was riding towards the rest of the Boer army at Ladysmith. Little did Botha know that the British who'd occupied Twin Peaks had now been ordered by Littleton to withdraw, and were at this very minute retracing their steps, leaving 100 of their comrades, including their commanding officer, dead behind them. Close to midnight, Warren had a visitor, a journalist from the Morning Post, who somehow was managing that job whilst also holding down a position of lieutenant in the South African Light Horse. 25-year-old Winston Churchill. Stuck at Buller's HQ as a journalist watching the events unfold through telescopes, Churchill had decided to actually ride over to Spion Kop to see for himself what was going on. And as he tried to make his way up the hill, he met troops retreating off the summit. He was shocked to see men so dehydrated and bewildered that to him they almost looked drunk. He rode over to Warren to give that first-hand account of the disaster that he was witnessing. And the general then sent him back to find Thornycroft and inform him that 1,400 reinforcements were finally on their way. The future British wartime Prime Minister found Thornycroft near the summit, but the commander, who had been left to his own devices all afternoon, had finally made a decision. He was evacuating his men under the cover of darkness before he lost even more in the following morning. 243 British troops had died attempting to secure Spion Kop. 1,250 had been injured or captured. As the retreating army stumbled down the hill, they were met by members of the Natal Indian Ambulance, bringing them water in sacks carried on donkeys. These Indians were helping the injured down to safety and carrying those too injured on stretchers. The 1,100-strong Indian Ambulance Corps had been set up by the Indian community in the British colony of Natal, and despite not being allowed to carry weapons, they wanted to show their support for the British Empire in some way. Somewhat ironically, one of the most prominent organisers was a young lawyer, Mahatma Gandhi. So there, on the 23rd, 24th of January 1900, in the space of a few square miles, we had Louis Botha, the first Prime Minister of South Africa, Britain's wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and the champion of Indian independence from the British Empire, Mahatma Gandhi. Oh, and we also had, of course, the former Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police during the Jack the Ripper murders too. Whilst Botha, Churchill and Gandhi's stars were to rise, Warren's was to fall very rapidly after Spion Kop. Buller referred to Warren as an old duffer. Warren's painfully slow build-up, his lack of communication during the battle, and his failure to launch a diversionary attack on the Tabanyama Ridge using Hart's Irish Brigade were all huge blunders. But Buller had realised just how slow Warren's progress had been in those days preceding the battle, and he hadn't followed his instincts to replace him. So Redvers Buller's star also waned. It had been in descent since Black Week, and now as his army retreated across the Tugela River, Sir Redvers Buller earned the nickname Redvers Buller, and also the ferryman of the Tugela. On the morning of the 25th of January, as dawn broke after the British had withdrawn, the dejected Botha and his fellow Boers were shocked to see two of their men standing on the summit of Spion Kop waving their hats in celebration. Sometimes the margin between victory and defeat is very narrow. So it was at Spion Kop. Both sides had withdrawn because they thought the other side had won. But on the morning of the 25th of January, it was the Boers, much to their own surprise, who were left in charge of the hill. It had cost the British 1,500 casualties for no strategic gain. Ladysmith was still no closer to relief. But it had been a costly victory for the Boers too. Their 68 men dead and 267 wounded, whilst a lot less than the British, were men that their tiny army could ill afford to lose. The fact that both sides thought they had lost and abandoned the mountain makes this almost a farcical battle, if it wasn't for the huge cost of life. As Napoleon once said, the greatest general is he who makes the fewest mistakes. After the war, as professional football became more popular in Britain and new stadiums were built, huge earth embankments or terraces were constructed for fans to watch the matches. A journalist for the Liverpool Echo, a city where many of those Lancashire soldiers came from, reported on this new terrace at Liverpool F.C.'s ground at Anfield and described its steep incline as looking like Spion Kop. And the name stuck, and it continues to this very day. The Kop. Well, thank you for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed that story from the Boer War. I'm working hard on more stories from British history for you, like the Indian Mutiny, the Crimean War, and coming really soon, the story of Colour Sergeant Bourne, hero of Rorke's Drift. But in the meantime, keep well, and I'll see you very soon.